Well, good morning, everybody at home, and I hope you're enjoying listening to this morning in your living rooms or your dens. My name is Brett Wilson. I'm one of the adult Sunday school teachers here at Tomball Bible Church, and we have a great story from the Gospel of John. It is an adventure not on the high seas, it's an adventure on the low sea. It's the story of Jesus walking on the Sea of Galilee, which we've already heard this morning, but we're going to hear it again. The story has a plot line. It has a storyline, and the plot line is dim, done for, drowning disciples drop and adore Jesus. Okay, I know you're going to give me a D on this one, but think about how applicable it is to our lives. Excuse me. Just a couple of weeks ago, we were living fairly normally, and now we've got coronavirus. We're all locked down. There's nobody here at the church except for a few people. The economy has cratered. The stock market has cratered. And the price of oil has gone down, affecting many of us in Houston. And so it looks like we're done for. It looks like we're kind of drowning, doesn't it? But there's a spiritual lesson here. It is our big takeaway today, and that lesson is that when Jesus rescues you, the only reasonable response is worship. Not if he rescues you, but when Jesus rescues us, the only reasonable response is worship. And worship is what we were made for. So we're going to dive in. If you have your Bibles at home, turn to John chapter 6. We're going to read 5 verses beginning in verse 16. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing, and when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." Then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. So I just love this story. I think I heard it first in VBS or in Sunday school as a kid. And parents, many of you at home have read the story to your children. You've heard it read already this morning. If you have grandkids, if you're a grandparent, you've read it to them. And it's been in the Jesus movie. If you've seen the Jesus movie, you've seen Jesus walking on the sea to the boat. It's a fabulous story. It's a wonderful story. It is a true story. It's a real story. It's one of the Bible stories that remains well known outside the church. And in the corporate world, in the business world, you may hear things like this. You'll be having a cup of coffee, somebody will come up to you at the coffee mess and say, "Man, have you heard about Peter? I mean, the guy's got a promotion, a brand new promotion to a great job, and he just got a promotion 6 months ago, and he got one 6 months before that. I mean, he's a high flyer. The dude really walks on water." Well, today, we're going to get to see Peter. Simon Peter, that is, and he really will walk on water. So when I graduated from high school in Florida, I went to a small college of engineering on the North Shore of Long Island. It was totally devoted to ship design. And they had an intercollegiate sailing team, and I didn't know how to sail. I mean, I was clueless about sailing. I'd maybe done it once or twice, but I had a friend, Chris. He was from Maine. He's still a good friend of mine. And he said, "Brett, I'm looking for a crew," he said. And I said, "I don't know how to sail." And he said, "Well, I'll teach you how to sail." And so I joined him, and we joined the sailing team. And over maybe 3 or 4 months, I learned how to sail under Chris. We raced fast 2-man sloops. They were tricky little boats about 14 feet long. My job was the centerboard and the jib. Chris's job was the mainsail, and he was always at the tiller, and he was always telling me what to do. And so I can remember in my sophomore year, the sailing team practice started in March, and it was, I think, the second day of practice. So we went down to the beach, and all the 6 boats were there, and everybody got their boat rigged up, put it into the water, and it was one of these lovely days in Long Island. I don't know if you've seen days like this. It was 45 degrees outside. The wind was coming from the north, gusting at about 25 to 30 knots. There was 3-foot choppy waves all over Long Island Sound. And at that time of year, the water temperature in Long Island Sound is 40 degrees. So Chris and I got in our boat. And I mean, we just screamed offshore to windward. We were both hiked out, had our feet under the straps. I'm leaning way back over the boat, so is Chris. The waves are slapping me, the spray's going everywhere, and we just screamed. We were flying out. And before you know it, we were 300 yards offshore. And bam, knocked down, capsize. Flat on the side. Sails in the water. Chris and I flew out of the boat. And then things got worse. A couple waves come by. We haven't got to the boat yet. It turns turtle. Turning turtle, the boat's upside down. The mast is down in the water. Oops, we got a bit of a problem here. Well, in the spirit of it gets dark before it turns totally pitch black, something else happened that made it even worse. But I can't tell you about that today. It'd take too long. So I'm going to leave you in suspenders on that one this morning. And I will say, though, that after that, as we did get the boat in, and I'm here standing before you, so I'm alive, that's good. And we got the boat in, and then my friend Joel, who was driving the Boston Whaler along the shore, said, "Brett, come out and help me. We got a boat down." So we went down the beach. We rescued a boat. I had to get a guy out of the water. He'd been in it about 25 minutes. He had a wetsuit on, which I did not. And he grabbed my hands from over the side of the Boston Whaler. He could not help himself in. It was all I could do to get him into the boat. All that to say, when we read this story of Jesus walking on the sea, the disciples are in real danger that night. They're in trouble. And if Jesus doesn't come along, they're toast. So today, we really are in an adventure on the low sea. Let's pray. Father, we praise you this morning for Jesus Christ, God the eternal Word. And today, as we read and as we listen, we'd ask that you would open our ears, Father, that we would hear him, that we would hear the words of Jesus speaking to us through your Spirit. We ask that you'd open our eyes as we see Jesus in this very familiar story, that we would see him anew. We ask that you'd open our hearts, that you would change us, that we might bow before Jesus and worship him today. And Father, we ask these things in the name of the Son, through the power of your Holy Spirit. Amen. So we have some background, and on your screen, I'm not sure how you're seeing this at home, but there is a picture of the Sea of Galilee. Evan talked to us about it last week. It's actually a lake. John also calls it the Sea of Tiberias. There's a little city in the southwest side of it, named after the Roman emperor. And Luke uses the term Lake Gennesaret. In the Old Testament, it's called the Sea of Kinnereth. It is, as Evan said, 8 miles wide, east to west, about 13 miles long, north to south. It's about 140 feet deep in the middle. And it is the lowest body of fresh water on the planet, about 700 feet below sea level. Surrounded by low mountains, they raise up to about 2,000 feet. We'd call them high hills. Maybe in Texas, we'd still call them mountains. I'm not sure. And Jesus' headquarters was the city of Capernaum. It's on the northwest shore. It's about 11 o'clock on your map. And if you go there today, you can still see the foundation for the synagogue where Jesus visited and where he taught at. It's a couple layers of basalt rock. It's black rock, volcanic rock, that is the foundation there. Bethsaida is the other town along the sea that's of import to us today. It literally means the house of fishing. It was a fishing village. We know Philip came from there, Philip the disciple, and 2 other pairs of fishermen disciples came from there. Peter, his brother Andrew, and James and his brother John, who is the author of this gospel. And Bethsaida is right up at where the Jordan River comes in from the north into the sea. Now, the next chart is the remains of what is now called the Jesus boat. You can see this in Israel. A couple of fishermen discovered it in 1986 along the shore of the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee. There'd been a severe drought, and so this boat popped out of the water, still stuck in the mud. They called the authorities. The authorities rescued the boat. They have preserved it. It's in a museum. You can actually go see it. And so here's a drawing of what it would have looked like in real life. It's 27 feet long. It's 4.5 feet high, and it's about 6 feet in beam or width. You could stick up to about 15 people in it, so all the disciples could get in it. has 4 oars, 2 on either side, which is not a lot, has 2 rudders, 1 on either side. They hadn't figured out the technology of centerline rudders at that time, and had a sail, but it's only useful for going downwind. And in most of our story today, the disciples will either be going slowly, they're in light winds, or they're rowing against the wind. So that sail would be furled up. Now, our story takes place in early spring. And how do we know that? Well, we know it because John tells us before the feeding of the 5,000 that Passover was at hand. And so Passover always occurs in late March to mid-April. And so when this event happens that we're going to talk about, Jesus walking on the sea, this may be a week to go before Passover occurs. This particular Passover is the second of 3 in the Gospel of John. And that's a little bit sobering because in just a year, Jesus will be crucified. Now, Jesus walking on the sea is also the 5th sign miracle of 7 sign miracles in the Gospel. All the 4 Gospels include the feeding of the 5,000, but only Matthew and Mark join John in the story of Jesus walking on the sea. We don't really know why. It may be an indication that John didn't rely on the Gospels of Matthew and Mark when he wrote his Gospel. It may be that he excised portions of those Gospels and he didn't know about them. We really don't know. About 90% of John is unique to the Gospel of John. So what we're going to do today is exposit or take apart or unpack a combined or composite account, which I've woven together, I've stitched it together in more or less chronological order from the Gospels of John, Matthew, and Mark. It's not the best way to look at a passage from the Gospel. Each writer has his own purpose, his own intent, his own audience. But it does let us see this event through a wider lens. We're going to see everything that Scripture has to say about it. So on the screen, and you may have a bulletin at home, I'm not really sure what you can see, but John is going to be in yellow or orange-yellow, Matthew's going to be in blue, and Mark is going to be in green, and only the verses from John are numbered. Now, one more thing before we begin. You may have heard it say, and some people from some of the cults, from Mormonism or from Jehovah's Witness, they'll say this, and some critics will say that the Bible does not clearly state that Jesus is God. Well, that's unequivocally untrue. It does state that Jesus is God. It does it in 3 different ways. And first, there are direct statements that he is God. We see this right at the beginning of John's Gospel, where John writes, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning." The second way that the Scriptures tell us that Jesus is God is that he does things that only God can do. The 7 sign miracles are some of those things. Taking water in a bunch of big jars, changing its chemical composition, making something with apparent age that tastes really good, wine, and a whole gob of wine. Healing the servant, or the son, of an official from long distance. And then, in the pool of Bethesda, he recreates the legs of this lame beggar merely by saying, "Get up, just get up." And his legs are new. In the feeding of the 5,000 that Evan taught us last week, a little boy comes with a couple of barley loaves and some fish. And what does Jesus do? He just prays. He just gives thanks. And immediately there's enough food to feed the crowd. So the third way that the Bible tells us that Jesus is God is that he receives from people what is only due to God, and that is worship. We're going to see all 3 in our story today. So let's begin. We're going to unpack this combined composite passage in 4 acts, like the acts of a play. And so Act 1 is events leading to our passage. Scene 1 is John the Baptist is beheaded by Herod. We'll be reading Matthew 14, verses 10 through 12. He, that's Herod, sent and had John beheaded in the prison. You may remember that Herod is having a big party for all his friends, and his wife is there. And that John had accused him and his wife of adultery, and so they were not fond of him. At least his wife wasn't, Herod's wife. So he had John beheaded in the prison, and John's head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took the body and buried it, and they went and told Jesus. Scene 2. Jesus and the disciples try to get away alone. That's the next verse in Matthew 14:13. Now Jesus, when he heard this, he withdrew from there by a boat to a desolate place by himself. And if you can see the map, you see the little arrows going across the map. It's going from Capernaum to somewhere on the eastern shore of the lake, somewhere south of Bethsaida. So Jesus, in his divine nature as God the Son, certainly knew of the death of John the Baptist before it occurred and when it occurred. But because he was fully man, when he is told by John's disciples, I think it deeply saddened him. I think it hit him really hard. John the Baptist, even though he appears in the New Testament, is the last great Old Testament prophet. He is the forerunner, the one preparing the way for Messiah. John baptized Jesus. And John was also related to Jesus because Jesus' mother, Mary, was a distant relative of Elizabeth, John's mother. And so Jesus and John were sort of distant cousins. And I think Jesus needed to get away to mourn. I think he needed to get away to express his grief to the Father. And so he gathers up his disciples and crosses the lake to get alone to pray. And that brings us to scene number 3. The crowds follow Jesus. And we're still in Act 1, Matthew 14. We'll read verse 13 again, as well as verse 14. Now, when Jesus heard this, when he heard from John's disciples that John had been beheaded, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. We'll find out from the other Gospels that disciples go with him. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. So in your map, you may see a map with an arrow, an orange arrow going this way, and it's all the people walking to see Jesus on the eastern shore of Galilee, walking from the towns on the west side. And they got there before Jesus did. Now in March, the winds on the Sea of Galilee are usually very, very light. And so they were probably rowing the boat to get there, and they were going pretty slowly. And it would have been fairly easy to walk the 6 or 7 or 8 miles across the north of the Sea of Galilee and get to the spot before Jesus and the disciples got there. The text tells us that he had compassion on the sick people. Now that Greek word for compassion means to be moved in your bowels, which sounds a little bit funny to us and maybe a little bit impolite. But think about it. If a tragedy happens to you, if someone that's close to you falls sick or passes away, or there's a national tragedy, and you weep and you cry, your stomach muscles tighten up from the top of your chest all the way down. It's gut-wrenching. And I think Jesus felt that way for these people. They were his people, and he loved them. And it hurt him, to see them so sick. And so he came across the sea to pray, but he sets aside what was on his agenda to heal the sick. Now, scene 4 is Jesus feeding the 5,000. We covered that last week. Evan Godbold preached on it. So we're going to go to Act 2 now. And sending crowd and disciples away, Jesus communes with the Father. To help us set the stage, we're going to go back and read verses 14 and 15 from John chapter 6. And so we're right after the feeding of the 5,000. Our first scene is when the crowd becomes mesmerized by all the freebies, Jesus sends them home. So verse 14 of chapter 6 of John, when the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who has come into the world." And perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force and make him king, Jesus dismissed the crowds. So the people had eaten, all this big multitude, they had eaten their fill and even more. And they're thinking, who could do what this Jesus did? Is he not the Messiah? Is he not the prophet like Moses who led us into the promised land? Is he not the warrior king, the deliverer of Israel? And the crowds were absolutely right about who he was. They were absolutely right, but they were wrong about his incarnation. Jesus had already rebuffed the tempter's offer when Satan said to him in the wilderness, I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world. You can have everything. All you have to do is worship me. And Jesus had already rebuffed that. But here it is again. It doesn't go away. So Jesus intercepted the crowd's demands and sent them away. Before Jesus would reign over the world, he needed to die for the sins of the world. Scene number 2, our dim disciples don't discern. The disciples did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. Now, this sentence comes from the Gospel of Mark, and it is actually at the end of Mark's account of Jesus walking on the sea, but it belongs to the front of the account. It's actually what the disciples were thinking, what was going through their minds right after the feeding of the 5,000. So I've pulled it up to the front. The phrase, their hearts were hardened, is a bit troublesome to us. Literally, it means their hearts were like a stone. They were callous. They were impenetrable. And in context, what it means when they finished seeing the loaves and fishes, the miracle of the loaves and fishes, the disciples really just couldn't put 2 and 2 together. They didn't get it. They were spiritually dim. And like the crowd, the disciples thought that Jesus was the warrior king, the deliverer of Israel, who would free them from Roman rule and distribute all the messianic goodies of the coming age to everybody. Nobody'd have to work. They'd get all these freebies. And it had not dawned on the disciples that Jesus was God incarnate. Now, I'm absolutely not dissing the disciples. When the Gospels portray the disciples, they're really speaking to us as Christians. We too are spiritually dim until Jesus reveals himself to us. And sometimes when we think of Jesus, all we're looking at is the loaves and fishes. All we're thinking about is his blessings. All we're considering is his benefits. But Jesus fed the crowd loaves and fishes in order to point out that he was the bread of life and that he is the bread of life, which is next week's passage. Jesus wants to give us something much better than loaves and fishes. He wants to give us himself. Scene number 3. At dusk, Jesus directs the disciples to sail away without him. When evening came, he made the disciples get into the boat. He compelled them to get into the boat and go before him. And then his disciples went down to the sea, got in a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum, or as Mark says, to Bethsaida. So it's getting dark now. It's about 6 p.m. at night. Jesus has dispersed the crowds. They're walking back to their villages and homes. So he makes the disciples get into the boat without him, and they do that. And so off they go. And it appears, when you put all the accounts together, that it's a 2-legged journey. They first travel to Bethsaida, and then they go to the west side of the lake. Now, Jesus may have told the disciples to make a port call at Bethsaida. We don't know. And it's possible that they thought that they'd stop there for a while, and then Jesus was going to come and meet up with them, and then they'd all go on the boat to the western shore. So they get in the boat, and they row to Bethsaida. But the disciples knew that they were supposed to go to Capernaum. So after a while, Jesus doesn't show up. It's the 15-minute rule. If the prof doesn't show up in college, that means the class is done, so you leave. So he doesn't show up at Bethsaida. He doesn't intend to. And they get back in the boat and start rowing for Capernaum. But they don't make it to Capernaum. And on the map, you see this little green oval at Gennesaret. They're going to get blown south by the wind. Apparently, the wind was from the northwest. So they're coming to this place which has no city. It's a bunch of fields, farming fields. There's no town there. And that's where they're going to land. And in the meantime, scene 4, Jesus enters into intimate communion with the Father. Then Jesus withdrew, says the Scriptures, to a mountain by himself to pray. We're able to communicate with one another in language because the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit eternally communicate within the Trinity. And language is the gift of God. Each person in the one God, forever expressing his delight and joy in the others. The Father forever telling the Son how much he loves him. The Son forever proclaiming to the Father, Abba, Father, and obeying him in love. And the Spirit forever proclaiming and exclaiming the glories of the Father and the Son. We can love, actually, because God is triune. Because between the Father, Son, and Spirit, there is this love, which is the intimate communication eternally between the Father, Son, and Spirit. And now, after a long day, after hearing about the death of his distant cousin, John, after a lengthy boat ride, after spending several hours healing the sick, after feeding the crowd, Jesus goes up on the mountains on the east side of the lake to pray. And there Jesus will enter into the eternal conversation, into the communion that is forever his joy. And I wonder, did he speak with John the Baptist? As God the Son, as God the eternal Word, and although he was fully man, but as God the eternal Word, did he speak to John and tell him, "Well done, my good and faithful servant"? Let's look for a minute at Ephesians 2:18. For through Jesus, we both have access in one Spirit to the Father. This is a Trinitarian verse about prayer. When we pray, we come into the throne room of God. We come into the Holy of Holies. And we do that via the Holy Spirit through the person of Jesus Christ. We can do this because we've been united as believers, as those who have trusted him. We've been united to Christ. We've actually been placed into Christ, all those who have put our faith in him. And as Ephesians chapter 1, verse 3 says, God chose us in him, Jesus, before the foundation of the world. God chose us in him, in Christ, before the foundation of the world. And because we are in Christ, we have access to that same intimacy in prayer that Jesus had with the Father that night on the mountain. C.S. Lewis says of prayer, the whole threefold life of the three-personal being is actually going on in that ordinary little bedroom where an ordinary man, an ordinary woman, an ordinary child is saying his prayers. So prayer is not so much trying to move God to get him to answer our requests, right? It's really our response to his prior invitation to enter into the conversation between the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, a conversation that never had a beginning and that will never have an end. So from 1880 to 1980, it was common for telephones in the United States to be connected in party lines. And I can kind of remember that from my childhood. I was talking to Dick Hastings about it a couple weeks ago. And it sounds really weird to us because there was no privacy. I mean, you could pick up the line and other people would be talking, and you could eavesdrop if you were really good at picking it up silently. It was great to hear the local the gossip in the neighborhood. Maybe you heard the gospel too. And so if you want to have a private conversation with somebody, you had to negotiate that, right? You had to make an arrangement. I need this time, 7:30 to 8, and I want to talk to, my aunt. Well, there's an eternal party line going on between the persons of the Trinity. And as believers, all we have to do to join it is pick up the phone. We just have to pick up the phone. It doesn't matter when. It doesn't matter in what circumstances we pick up the phone. That party line is always going on. Our triune God is always on the line, and he never hangs up. And that's what prayer is about. All right, act number 3, disciples in danger in the deep. And our first scene is the disciples battle the storm through the night. It was now dark. It was a dark and stormy night. And Jesus, that's not in the text, that's in the marginal reading. And Jesus had not yet come to them. And the sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. And Jesus saw, that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. So now, in the darkness of night and in God's sovereign plan, he sends a strong wind from the Mediterranean up and over the foothills and over the mountains on the top of the Sea of Galilee and down onto the lake. And as the winds go down onto the lake, they pick up speed. And winds of up to 60 miles an hour have actually been recorded on the lake. And on the shore, surf up to 10 feet high has been recorded, which would be pretty cool if you like that sort of thing, which I do. That would correspond to 6-foot waves in the middle of the lake. So we're going to back off of that. I'm just going to say it didn't take that big a storm. I'm just going to guess 30 to 35 knot winds. We got 4-foot waves in the lake. It's just a guess. And so when Jesus finishes praying, he sees the disciples are making headway painfully. That means they're not getting anywhere quick. They got a boat that's nearly 30 foot long, so it takes up a good part of this stage. It weighs a ton or two. They got 10, 11, 12 guys in it. It's pitching violently as the waves slam into the bow of this boat. And they've been rowing all night. They've been at this for about 6 to 8 hours, as hard as they can. And I don't care how strong you are, how good an oarsman you are, it's a killer, right? Your hands are raw, they're blistered. Your back and your arms, they ache. You can't give up, though. Because if you give up, that boat, which is going into the waves, is going to turn sideways to the waves. And when it turns sideways to the waves, they're going to capsize. They weren't on the Titanic. They didn't have life jackets. It was going to be a bad scene if they capsized. They are in danger on the low sea. And so it's fascinating that Jesus sees them. Maybe he can actually physically see them from the mountain. Maybe he sees them because he's omnipresent as God. He knows what they're going through. He knows what they're thinking. He knows exactly what their fears are. He knows ours today. He knows exactly what's going on in the world with coronavirus, with a 50% drop in the price of oil, with a global recession coming on. Jesus Christ knows what's going on, and he knows our hearts and how we feel about it. Scene number 2, the disciples are terrified as they see Jesus walking on the sea. And when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles in the 4th watch of the night, that's between 3 and 6 a.m. in the morning, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and he meant to pass by them. And they were frightened and said, "It's a ghost!" And they cried out with fear. And so there's a map. You can see Jesus, kind of a little guy walking next to the boat up there. So it's probably 5 o'clock in the morning. Not going to be light for another hour. Most normal people are asleep. But our disciples have been straining at the oars all night long. They're cold, they're wet, they're exhausted, and there's no coffee on board. Everybody then sees Jesus walking near the boat on the waves, and they're scared out of their wits. I mean, they're all seeing this. It's not like it's just one person. It's real. They can't all be losing their minds. And so they think it's a phantom. That's what the Greek word actually is. They think it's an apparition. A real apparition, but an apparition. Mark, in his gospel, notes that Jesus wanted to pass by the disciples. And that seems pretty strange to us. So did Jesus intend to just kind of walk on to shore and leave these guys out here to manage on their own? Was that his intent? Is that what was going on? Why would he do that? But what if Jesus was deliberately seeking to remind the disciples of Moses' encounter with Yahweh on Mount Sinai? So read with me from Exodus chapter 34, verses 5 through 7. The Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him, Moses there. The Lord stood with Moses. The Lord stood with Moses, which is interesting, and proclaimed the name of the Lord. the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, Yahweh, Yahweh, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and the fourth generation. And so just as Yahweh passed before Moses 1,400 years before, now Jesus passes before the disciples. This act of passing by is an implicit, unspoken declaration that Jesus is God. Jesus is walking on the water. The whole event is the first indication in our story of Jesus' deity. Jesus is doing what only God can do. And that brings us to act number 4, our final act. Drowning, doubting disciples drop and adore Jesus. And so Jesus in scene 1 is going to reveal his identity as Yahweh. And he says to them, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." So in John, Jesus replies to the disciples' fear with only 2 phrases, "It is I, don't be afraid." But Mark inserts this third phrase at the front, "Take heart." Take heart is a single word in Greek. Courage. It's a positive command. It's at the front of the sandwich. Do not be afraid is 2 words, no fear. Or as the King James Version said, fear not. It's at the end of the sandwich. And right in the middle is this 2-word phrase in Greek, I am. It's the basis for the commands not to fear and to take courage. In Greek, Jesus' statement, I am, is ego eimi. And in common speech, it's used to say, it's I, it's me. That's how people use that phrase in Greek. But there's not really anything very common about Jesus walking on the Sea of Galilee. I mean, there's no precedent in all of human history for him doing that. There's no category to put it in. Jesus is doing something that only God can do. So it just doesn't make much sense that Jesus is walking by and he says to the disciples, hey guys, it's me. No, he is saying, ego eimi, I am. As one commentator writes, standing where only God can stand, Jesus declares what only God can declare, I am. For Jesus is the one who revealed himself to Moses at the burning bush. He is the I am that I am. He is Yahweh. And as Job declared of God in Job chapter 9, verse 8, who alone stretched out the heavens and trampled on the waves of the sea. And as Asaph wrote in Psalm 77, verse 19, your way was through the sea, your path was through the great waters, yet your footprints were unseen. This declaration from Jesus, ego eimi, I am, is a direct statement that Jesus is God. It's the second way that our passage shows him to be deity. Scene number 2, Jesus rescues Peter. It's all from the Gospel of Matthew. And Peter answered him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. And Jesus said, come. So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, when he saw the storm, it's a metaphor for the storm, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? So it's a little more than ironic that Peter's first name, it's a little more than ironic that Peter's name is actually Simon Bar-Jonah. So both Peter and the prophet after whom his father was named had this unusual habit of abandoning ship, of walking the plank in storms at sea. And like Jonah, you might say that Peter tended to get in over his head. So Peter asked Jesus if he can come to him on the water, walk out to him on the water. And that's great for Peter, good for Peter. And Jesus says, come. Jesus is amazing. He loves Peter. And Jesus knows what's about to go down. And so Peter steps out of the boat. And the gusts pick up. You can just imagine the scene. Here comes along a nice set of surf. Big waves are coming in. And Peter cannot help himself. His fisherman instincts kick in. And he says, "Whoa!" Or in Hebrew, "Oi!" And all of a sudden, Peter had this terrible sinking feeling. You might say that his prospects were about to be underwater. And so now, for the first time in John's gospel, Jesus heals or saves somebody by touch. He doesn't command Peter to rise on the waves, and he could have done that. He just reaches out and grabs his hand. The whole event was a setup, right? It's all a setup, a divine setup. Jesus knew that Peter was going to ask him if he could come out to him on the water. And Jesus knew that he was going to command Peter to come out to him on the water. It was all a setup, all intended that Peter would cry out to him, "Lord, save me." Now, the one thing Peter did not say as he's sinking into the water was, "Nah, I'm good, I got this." And Peter cried out because he knew he was going to drown. He cried out because Jesus had revealed to him who he, Jesus, really was, and that he, Jesus, was Peter's only hope. "Lord," cries Peter, "save me." And so after Jesus takes hold of Peter, he raises him up right before him, and he looks him in the eye, and he said, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" Literally, why did you duplicate? Why did you go back and forth in your confidence? So why does Jesus say this? It's all these disciples in the boat. Is he trying to embarrass them before the disciples? Is that what's going on? Does he say it to Peter harshly, like, "Come on, Peter, can't you trust me? Can't you do better than this?" Or does he say it to Peter like he would say to a little child? "Oh, you of little faith, why didn't you trust me? Why did you doubt in me?" It's not like Peter's faith was small, and ours would have been big enough that we could have walked all the way out to the boat. It's that Peter's faith had a low view of Jesus. For in the crisis he found himself in, Jesus wasn't big enough. Jesus wasn't big enough. And Peter became overwhelmed by fear. That's pretty applicable today, I think. That's really applicable to our lives right now. It's hard to understand what's going to happen, health-wise, financially, job-wise. We're in tough shape right now. Peter's faith did not see that Jesus was God. For Peter, Jesus was not enough. But Jesus loves Peter, and Jesus will never give up on Peter, and he'll never give up on us. And you know, Peter loves Jesus. So at the very end of the Gospel of John, Peter's going to do a do-over. And he's going to jump out of a boat again to get to Jesus. And he does that because in his very far from perfect way, like us, he loves Jesus. Scene 3, the disciples drop in worship. Then they were glad to take him into the boat, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded. And those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So Jesus comes with Peter, and they get into the boat. The storm stops. The sea instantly becomes flat calm. That never happens. If there's a wind blowing, you got waves for a long time after that. But here, the sea just goes flat calm. The disciples are blown away. They cannot believe it. They are astounded. They have seen in real time and with their own eyes the power of the creator and sustainer of the universe, Jesus Christ. And for the first time in Matthew's gospel, which is chapter 14, we're halfway through Matthew's gospel, the disciples address Jesus as the Son of God, which is both a messianic name, a name for Jesus as Messiah, the ultimate Davidic king, and a divine name, that Jesus is the Son of God. He is God the Son, the second person of the Trinity. And the disciples dropped to their knees in awe. Now, if you're following the text, that's not in the text. It's another one of my marginal readings, something I've invented for today. But I mean, seriously, what other posture would do? They drop and they worship Jesus. And this is the third statement in our story that proclaims the deity of Jesus, that Jesus receives from his disciples what is rightfully only due to God, which is worship. And finally, our last scene, we're getting to go home, soon safely ashore. And immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going, at Gennesaret, and they moored to the shore. We don't know for certain if this is another miracle. Immediately, the word immediately could mean they got there just like that, and they did time and space travel. But it just could mean soon. Immediately can be translated as soon, and in that case, Jesus gets in the boat, and another 15 or 30 minutes, or however long it took to row to shore on the flat sea, they came ashore. Well, what an adventure we have had this morning. And our lesson is when Jesus rescues you. If he rescues you is not the question. When he rescues you, the only reasonable response is worship. Worship is to declare the worth and the excellence of God. It is what we were designed for. It is God's purpose in our lives, and nothing else will satisfy our deepest longings. Nothing else will satisfy our deepest longings. So we have 5 takeaways today. Number 1 is if you don't know Jesus personally, if you're listening in and you don't know Jesus personally, don't miss this opportunity to trust him. The only reasonable response to the gospel is to trust Jesus Christ. The next 4 takeaways are for all who are believers in Jesus that are listening in. Christ sends those he loves into difficult situations. God is determined to transform you into the character, into the likeness of Jesus Christ. And Jesus was the suffering servant. There's no way you're going to escape it. God will send you into difficult situations. That's part of it. That's part of its beauty. And when he does that, will you keep on rowing? Will you keep on persevering? Will you keep on looking to him? And how will you do that, even when the situation becomes really, really bleak? Number 3, do not fear what Christ has called you to do. Be sure that he's called you to do that, but don't fear to do it. Even if the footing is treacherous, even if you fail, even when you fail again, God's got you. Don't fear what he's called you to do. The 4th one is when you are sinking in life, take hold of Christ. Don't say, no, I'm good. I got this. Grab his hand. Grab a hold of Christ. And the 5th and final thing is make worship the very wellspring, the center, the core, the heart of your life. As you read the scriptures, think about the attributes of God and pull worship out of the word. Make a regular practice of coming into God's presence. Delight in God and give him delight. Give him joy. And set your heart on Jesus. It's the only reasonable response. Jesus walking on the water, a real adventure on the low sea. Let's pray.